The complete works of Swami Vivekananda, Jnana Yoga, Chapter 11b, The Cosmos, the Microcosm, Part 2. I, as I stand here, am the effect, the result of all the infinite past which is stacked onto me. And why is it necessary for me to remember all the past? When a great ancient sage, a seer, or a prophet of old, who came face to face with the truth, says something, these modern men stand up and say, "Oh, he was a fool," and just use another name. Huxley says it, or Tyndall, then it must be true. And they take it for granted. In place of ancient superstitions, they have erected modern superstitions. They have, in place of old popes of religion, installed modern popes of science. So we see that this objection is of memory is not valid, and that it is only a serious objection that is raised against this theory. Although we have seen that it is not necessary for the theory that there shall be the memory of past lives, yet at the same time we are in a position to assert that there are instances which show that this memory does overcome, and that each one of us will get back this memory in that life in which he will become free. Then alone you will find that this world is but a dream. Then alone will you realize in the soul of your soul that you are but actors and the world is a stage. Then alone will the idea of non-attachment come to you with the power of thunder. Then alone all this thirst for enjoyment, this clinging on to life and this world will vanish forever. Then the mind will see dearly as daylight how many times all these existed for you, how many millions of times you had fathers and mothers, sons and daughters, husbands and wives, relatives and friends, wealth and power. They came and went. How many times you were on the topmost crest of the wave, and how many times you were down at the bottom of despair. When memory will bring all these to you, then alone will you stand as a hero and smile when the world frowns on you. Then alone will you stand up and say, "I care not for thee even, O death, what terrors hast thou for me?" This will come to all. Are there any arguments, any rational proofs for this reincarnation of the soul? So far, we have been giving the negative side, showing that the opposite arguments to disprove it are not valid. Are there any positive proofs? There are, and most valid ones too. No other theory except that of reincarnation accounts for the wide divergence that we find between man and man in their powers to acquire knowledge. First, let us consider the process by which knowledge is acquired. Suppose I go into the street and see a dog. How do I know it is a dog? I refer it to my mind, and in my mind are groups of all my past experiences, arranged and pigeonholed as it were. As soon as I see a new impression, I take it up and refer it to some old pigeonholes, and soon I find a group of the same impressions already existing. I place it in that group and I am satisfied. I know it is a dog because it coincides with the impressions already there. When I do not find the cognates of this new experience inside, I become dissatisfied. When, not finding the cognates of an impression, we become dissatisfied, this state of the mind is called ignorance. But when finding the cognates of an impression already existing, we become satisfied, this is called knowledge. When one apple fell, men became dissatisfied. Then gradually they found out the group. What was the group they found? that all apples fell. So they called it gravitation. Now we see that without a fund of already existing experience, any new experience would be impossible, for there would be nothing to which to refer to the new impression. So, if, as some of the European philosophers think, a child came into the world with what they call the tabula rasa, such a child would never attain to any degree of intellectual power, because he would have nothing to which to refer his new experiences. We see that the power acquiring knowledge varies in each individual, and this shows that each one of us has come with his own fund of knowledge. Knowledge can only be got in one way, the way of experience. There is no other way to know. If we have not experienced it in this life, we must have experienced it in other lives. How is it that the fear of death is everywhere? A little chicken is just out of an egg and an eagle comes, and the chicken flies in fear to its mother. There is an old explanation. I should hardly dignify it by such a name. It is called instinct. What makes the little chicken just out of the egg afraid to die? How is it that as soon as a duckling, hatched by a hen, comes near the water, it jumps into it and swims? It never swam before, nor saw anyone swim. People call it instinct. It is a big word, but it leaves us where we were before. Let us study this phenomena of instinct. A child begins to play on the piano. At first, she must pay attention to every key she is fingering. And as she goes on and on for months and years, the playing becomes almost involuntary, instinctive. What was first done with conscious effort does not require its later on an effort of the will. This is not yet a complete proof. One half remains, and that is that almost all the actions which are now instinctive can be brought under the control of the will. Each muscle of the body can be brought under control. This is perfectly well known. So the proof is complete by this double method, that of what we call instinct is degeneration of voluntary actions. Therefore, if the analogy applies to whole of creation, if all nature is uniform, then what is instinct in lower animals as well as in men must be the degeneration of will. Applying the law, we dwelt upon the macrocosm, that each involution presupposes an evolution, and each evolution an involution. We see that instinct is involved reason. What we call instinct in men or animals must therefore be involved, degenerated, voluntary actions, and voluntary actions are impossible without experience. Experience started that knowledge, and that knowledge is there. The fear of death, the duckling taking to the water, and all involuntary actions in the human being which have become instinctive are the results of past experiences. So far we have produced very clearly, and so far as the latest science is with us. But here comes one difficulty. The latest scientific men are coming back to the ancient sages, and as far as they have done so, there is perfect agreement. They admit that each man and each animal is born with a fund of experience, and that all these experiences, all these actions in the mind are the result of past experience. But what they ask is the use of saying that the experience belongs to the soul. Why not say it belongs to the body and the body alone? Why not say it is hereditary transmission? Why not say it is hereditary transmission? This is the last question. Why not say that all the experience with which I am born is a resultant effect of all the past experiences of my ancestors? The sum total of the experience from the little protoplasm up to the highest human being is in me, but it has come from body to body in the course of hereditary transmission. Where will the difficulty be? This question is very nice, and we admit some part of this hereditary transmission. How far? As far as furnishing the material. We, by our past actions, conform ourselves to a certain birth in a certain body, and the only suitable material for that body comes from the parents who have made themselves fit to have that soul as their offspring. The simple hereditary theory takes for granted the most astonishing proposition without any proof that mental experience can be recorded in matters, that mental experience can be involved in matter. When I look at you in the lake of my mind, there is a wave. That wave subsides, but it remains in fine form as an impression. We understand a physical impression remaining in the body. But what proof is there for assuming that the mental impression can remain in the body, since the body goes to pieces? What carries it? Even granting it were possible for each mental impression to remain in the body, that every impression beginning from the first man down to my father was in my father's body, how could it be transmitted to me? Through the bioplasmic cell. How could that be? Because the father's body does not come into the child in toto. The same parents may have a number of children. Then, from this theory, the hereditary or transmission, where the impression and the impressed are one, it rigorously follows that by the birth of every child, the parents must lose a part of their own impressions. Or if the parents should transmit the whole of their impressions, then after the birth of the first child, their minds would be a vacuum. Again, if in the bioplasmic cell the infinite amount of impressions from all time has been entered, where and how is it? This is a most impossible position. And until these physiologists can prove how and where these impressions live in that cell, and what they mean by a mental impression sleeping in a physical cell, their position cannot be taken for granted. So far it is clear then that this impression is in the mind, and the mind comes to take its birth and rebirth and uses the material which is most proper for it. And that mind which has made itself fit for only a particular kind of body will have to wait until it gets that material. This we understand. The theory then comes to this, that there is hereditary transmission so far as furnishing the material to the soul is concerned. But the soul migrates and manufactures body after body, and each thought we think, each deed we do is stored in it in fine forms, ready to spring up again and take a new shape. When I look at you, a wave rises in my mind. It dives down as it were and becomes finer and finer, but it does not die. It is ready to start up again as a wave in the shape of memory. So all these impressions are in my mind, and when I die, the resultant force of them will be upon me. A ball is here, and each one of us takes a mallet in his hands and strikes the ball from all sides. The ball goes from point to point in the room, and when it reaches the door, it flies out. What does it carry out with it? The resultant of all these blows. That will give it its direction. So what directs the soul when the body dies? The resultant, the sum total of all the works it has done, of the thoughts that it has made. If the resultant is such that it has to manufacture a new body for further experience, It will go to those parents who are ready to supply it with suitable material for that body. Thus, from body to body it will go, sometimes to heaven and back again to earth, becoming a man or some lower animal. This way it will go on until it has finished its experience and completed the circle. It then knows its own nature, knows what it is, and ignorance vanishes, its powers become manifest. It becomes perfect. No more is there any necessity for the soul to work through physical bodies, nor is there any necessity for it to work through finer or mental bodies. It shines in its own light and is free, no more to be born, no more to die. We will not go into the particulars of this, but I will bring before you one more point with regard to this theory of reincarnation. It is a theory that advances the freedom of the human soul. It is the one theory that does not lay the blame of all our weaknesses upon somebody else, which is a common human fallacy. We do not look at our own faults. The eyes do not see themselves. They see the eyes of everybody else. We human beings are very slow to recognize our own weaknesses, our own faults, so long as we can lay the blame upon somebody else. Men in general lay all the blame of life on their fellow men, or failing that, on God, or they conjure up a ghost and say it is fate. Where is fate and who is fate? We reap what we sow. We are the makers of our own fate. None else has the blame, none else has the praise. The wind is blowing, those vessels whose sails are unfurled catch it and go forward on their way. But those which have their sails furled do not catch the wind. Is that the fault of the wind? Is it the fault of the merciful Father, whose wind of mercy is blowing without ceasing day and night, whose mercy knows no decay? Is it his fault that some of us are happy and some unhappy? We make our own destiny. His sun shines for the weak as well as for the strong. His wind blows for the saint and the sinner alike. He is the Lord of all, the Father of all, merciful and impartial. Do you mean to say that He, the Lord of creation, looks upon petty things of our life in the same light as we do? What a degenerate idea of God that would be. We are like little puppies, making life and death struggles here and foolishly thinking that even God Himself will take it as seriously as we do. We know what the puppy's play means. Our attempts to lay the blame on Him, making Him the punisher and the rewarder, are only foolish. He neither punishes nor rewards any. His infinite mercy is open to everyone at all times, in all places, under all conditions, unfailing, unswerving. Upon us depends how we use it. Upon us depends how we utilize it. Blame neither man nor God nor anyone in the world. When you find yourself suffering, blame yourselves and try to do better. This is the only solution to the problem. Those that blame others, and alas, the number of them is increasing every day, are generally miserable with helpless brains. They have brought themselves to that pass through their own mistakes and blame others. But this does not alter their position. It does not serve them in any way. This attempt to throw the blame upon others only weakens them that much more. Therefore, blame none for your own faults, stand upon your own feet, and take the whole responsibility upon yourselves. Say, this misery that I am suffering is of my own doing, and that very thing proves that it will have to be undone by me alone. That what I created, I can demolish. That which I created is created by someone else, I shall never be able to destroy. Therefore, stand up, be bold and be strong. Take the whole responsibility on your shoulders and know that you are the creator of your own destiny. All the strength and succor you want is within yourselves. Therefore, make your own future. Let the dead past bury its dead. The infinite future is before you, and you must always remember that each word, thought, and deed lays up a store for you, and that as the bad thoughts and the bad works are ready to spring up upon you like tigers, so also there is the inspiring hope that the good thoughts and the good deeds are ready with the power of 100,000 angels to defend you always and forever.